This video covers some of the more advanced uses of the editor, but this will only make sense if you've watched the editor overview already, which is linked here. With the main list selected, we can use some of the authoring tools. The tree of list links shows the lists that are linked to from the main list, and also the lists that are linked by those lists and so on. The indentation level shows the link relationships. Clear the output. In this drop-down box, we can see all of the variables that exist in the main list and all other linked to lists, directly or indirectly. Select this variable about whether or not we travel with a carry-on bag. The All Locations button shows everywhere in the list tree that the variable is defined either by a user prompt or a variable assignment, or everywhere that it is used or referenced. In these three reference cases, they are used in question conditionals, which are like the true-false cases where the list will include things or not based on the value of this variable. Now that we have a variable selected in the drop-down, this button changed from tree of list links to locations within links, meaning that it shows where the definitions and references from the previous screen are located within the list link tree. In other words, it only shows the lists in that tree which contain either a definition or a reference, and the others are not included. Clicking on the Conditional Paths button shows a more advanced reporting of how the variable is used. This shows the conditional pathways where the definitions or references for carry-on bag exist. It shows that all definitions and references for the variable exist only within the true cases of method transport airline, and there are 2 of these cases in the different lists shown. Of course, it makes sense that carry-on bag variable wouldn't be defined or used in any case where method transport airline was false. But if for some reason a reference was put in a false case, then there will be a variable referencing error reported, but using this tool can help solve such a problem. Variable referencing problems are discussed in the Wiki page linked here. The Check for Errors button is one way to check for problems like this. Clearing the variable selection lets us get back to just the tree of list links option. Let's open a file here and purposely introduce a syntax error. All lines must have an indent of a multiple of 2 spaces. So let's take one of them away. Here's another on-purpose error. Let's add a conditional case for carry-on bag inside the false case of method transport airline, which is the true case that starts at line 2. The false case starts at line 27. Now we see a case of variable reference error. There's a lot of red text here, but it's really just the first line, and each subsequent wrapping line is just providing helpful information about the error and how to fix it. Clicking on this first line jumps to where the problem is, which is what we just added. This is basically saying that we are trying to use the carry-on bag variable when it is possible that carry-on bag won't be defined. I say that it's possible based on the possible different paths that we could have taken to get to this point. So let's click on the Conditional Paths button to see how we can fix this. The error messages are still there, so scroll down past them, and here we see the reference in the false case of method transport airline. But all of the above definitions, and we need a definition before using a reference, are in the true case and none in the false case and none outside of any case. Another thing to note about the editor are these arrows in the left margin where we can collapse the entire true case of the method transport airline here. This is just for temporary visual ease of reading though. So let's get rid of that error test case, and now when we do the error check, it's no longer a problem. Let's introduce that same problem again, but this time we'll have a fix for it. I'll use autocomplete here, which is Control-Tab. Add an example reminder. This is the same variable problem that we had before. Click to check the conditional path again. This green prompt will ask the user about bringing a carry-on bag. It's currently inside the true case of method transport airline. So let's move it up here so that it is outside this conditional, meaning that regardless of whether we are traveling by air, the user will be prompted for this. Shift-Tab to reduce the highlighted block indent. Check for errors, and we see that fixed it. The conditional paths output shows the new definition right in the middle there at line 1 of the luggage list. The conditional graph shows that it is outside of any conditional case. So while this does solve the variable definition problem, it doesn't make sense. We would be asking the user about carry-on luggage even if they were not traveling by air. One of the design philosophies of this software is not to bother the user with questions that aren't necessary. This is the reason for having variables which can be defined anywhere in the lists rather than requiring all variables to be defined in some central location. Another reason is the flexibility of being able to use any of the many linked lists as the new main list to generate from. This is described more in the Wiki page linked here. Let's undo the change and put the prompt back where it was and get rid of the example variable reference. Let's look through some of the lists linked from the main travel list. Click on the list for clothing to pack, for example. Now let's say that we only want to generate a checklist for the clothes by themselves. We have a variable reference error at line 23 for communal lodging like staying at a hostel or staying with friends. Since this list is being used as a main list, we only see one reference for this variable and no definitions. Whereas in the main travel list from the previous example, this was defined as a user prompt in one of the preparation steps. A simple solution to this is to create a new user prompt for this variable right above. This is a nice solution because it solves the problem here when running on just this list, but it also solves a problem when this list is linked from somewhere else like the main list example before. In that case, the user has already answered the communal lodging question, and so the user will not be asked again here, because this variable is already defined. It would be possible to force the user to answer the question again by putting reset question in parentheses at line 23, but we don't want that behavior here. Finally, the last button we haven't covered is Generate Checklist, which will take us to the list generator page, which is covered in another video linked here. And since we have a main list selected here, if we click, whoops, this is a little off center, but it's not in the linked video that covers this page. Anyway, we see that it opens this page with that same list already selected, so we can just click Generate and go. Thanks for watching.